Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 74, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
And me, Rob Hubbard.
Now, we just want to say a huge thank you if you do check out this podcast every single Friday, or maybe you're one of our many new listeners. I know we're getting lots through the door recently. So just to kind of recap what we do on this show. Now, we kind of reminisce about the golden age of video games and computers. You know that excitement that you felt when you got your first ever games console? Do you remember that?
Yeah. Like those kind of shared memories of, downloading those MP3s, but you could only get 2 a night because the internet was really slow.
2 a week, I think it was for me. Or maybe, really old school, back on the Commodore 64, sliding that cassette tape into your data set, hit and rewind, type in LOAD, press and return, or just shift and break.
And then going to make a cup of tea.
Yeah, or dinner. Now, that's what the show's all about. It's, memories of video games. And believe it or not, though, in the world of retro, there are still lots of new stories and developments. So in a bit, Ravi and I are going to go through the top stories that have been making the headlines this week. And then in the second half of the show, we welcome a veteran from the video games and technology industry to be our special guest and share their stories. And my word, have we got a big one this week.
I can't believe we've got him on. And, this guy, I've listened to his music ever since I've been a kid, and it's all probably burnt into your minds if you've played the C64 or any other similar consoles. This is the master of video game music, Rob Hubbard.
Now, Rob, just to put this into perspective, he did over 100 game soundtracks on the Commodore 64 in about 8 years.
Yeah, and I've not seen that many interviews with him online. I've seen, Bedrooms to Billions talk to him recently, and there's a few kind of text ones, small answers and stuff, but this is a really detailed interview with Rob, so I think you guys are going to love it. Because
Rob, he's quite a hard man to get hold of. He doesn't tweet, he's not on Facebook, he doesn't have a website.
Yeah.
I won't ask how you found him. Ravi's secret contacts. Yeah. But, just thinking of some of the games he did, International Karate.
Oh, yeah, Monty on the Run.
Commando, Knuckle Busters, pretty much anyone who played the Commodore 64, this guy was like the soundtrack to our childhood.
Yeah, and, he influenced tons of other musicians as well, so he's kind of done a hell of a lot for video game music. And, Rob, he didn't think it would be a big thing. No. He didn't think that video game music would actually last more than a year.
Or the industry in itself, what I mean? So this is such an interesting interview. And Rob, we've had some huge names on recently, and Rob is another one that we constantly get asked for. So if you've been wanting to hear Rob Hubbard on the Retro Hour podcast, hang around. This interview is incredible. He's coming up in around 15 minutes from now. And if you do love the Retro Hour podcast and you listen on maybe iTunes or YouTube or SoundCloud, please do keep your reviews and comments coming in.
Yeah, because we haven't had that many iTunes ones recently, but we've got a load of new listeners. So come on, guys, join the review crew.
So please do keep those coming in. Obviously, it all helps us get up the charts and get in front of new people as well. So we really appreciate that. And of course, another way that you can show your support to the Retro Hour podcast is by making your way into the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. Now, we do have, and we've talked about this before, we think of this as a tip jar. It's completely optional. If you want to put a couple of quid, couple of euros, couple of dollars that goes into the running of this show, we have a PayPal link on the front page of the retrohour.com, and there's even a Bitcoin link as well if you want to do it anonymously, which a few people have been doing recently.
Yeah.
And we want to say a huge thank you this week, making their place in the Hall of Fame, Eric Nelson,
Liam Clancy,
William Bateman,
and Lee Besford,
who all made donations this week. If you'd like to do the same, obviously we appreciate every penny we get, and it all goes back into the running of the podcast. All you got to do is head to the retrohour.com. You've been playing some Sonic this week, Ravi.
Oh, yeah. We mentioned Time Twisted the other day, which was this 12-year made fan game that's free to download. Oh, my God. I've actually downloaded it and played it, and it's so good. Seriously, you can just set up your wireless pad really easily. And I had my nice Xbox One pad, and I was just sitting there kind of playing it. And it felt to me like after Sonic and Knuckles, this is the game that should have came. This is what Sega should have done. And if they'd released this on the Saturn or something,
can you imagine?
They'd still be around,
Yeah, it is. We talked about it obviously a couple of weeks ago. Quality of it, though, it could be a commercial release.
Oh, yeah. And the only difference I can see from it being a Mega Drive game is the size. That's not going to fit on a cartridge because there's so many wields and extra bonus levels, but also the music. The music's a lot more advanced than the Mega Drive could do.
Well, this year is obviously a very good one for retro Sonic fans because not only did we have the free game, but also Sega's official retro-style Sonic game, Sonic Mania, is getting very close. We must have first mentioned this about a year ago.
Yeah, and we kind of saw some really nice promos because it is 2D, and if anybody's also played Sonic Generations, it was another kind of really good title. So I think this is going to be like in that ilk.
Yeah, well, it's by a crew called Headcanon and Pagoda West. They're the ones who've, they do lots of ports of the classic Sonic games to like new systems. And you can tell this is a labour of love. And, ever since I saw the first trailer last summer, I've been really wanting to play this. And originally it was going to be out in Q1 this year. Then it got delayed a little bit like that. So, I got a Nintendo Switch. People are going to think I'm nuts here. Mainly to play this game on the go. I love my Switch. I've been playing loads of different games on it recently. But, I even got the new Street Fighter game that's on there. And Bomberman I've been playing and Mario Kart 8. But Sonic Mania, I was thinking, I'm going away on holiday this month to Italy. I want to play Sonic Mania on the plane, on the balcony. Unfortunately, it's going to kind of miss my deadline of June for my holiday. But we've now finally got an official release date, and it is August the 15th.
Oh, that's good. And what we're talking about here is a 2D Sonic game as well. It's not like your Sonic Adventure, is it?
No, there is one called Sonic Forces they're going to be bringing out later in the year. That's Sonic Teams, like kind of one that probably will be crap, let's be honest. But yeah, this is the one that's kind of a tribute. It could have come out on the Mega Drive looking at it.
And I think that's just fantastic. And you're also saying the kind of price point that they've introduced it at is really competitive.
Well, what would you pay for this game?
I'd pay 40, 50 quid for a new Sonic game. That was good.
Well, I was expecting probably about 30, 40 quid. But they've released today that it's going to be priced well below 20 quid. Apparently on Steam, you can pre-order it now with 10% off its usual $14.99 price.
Oh, wow. That's really cheap, yeah.
Yeah, so $14.99.
That's like an indie game kind of price, isn't it?
Yeah, but with Sega's official backing, so it's... I think this game is going to be amazing. Everything I've seen about it, and even there are some videos on YouTube, and if people haven't had a proper look into it yet, I imagine most fans of our show probably had. But I'll put those in our show notes this week at theretrohour.com. I've always been a Sonic fan since the early days. Never been that good at Sonic, if I'm honest, but that's part of the fun for me because I'm pretty crap at it. I do like the challenge of playing
getting past that challenging level.
Yeah, especially when you have the pinball bits as well. I'm like, you just get lost in those for hours.
Oh, God, yeah.
So bring it on Sonic Mania. I'm actually going away on my honeymoon later on this year, so even though it's going to miss my June holiday, I think I'll be ignoring the missus on the honeymoon. That's
it, planning for the honeymoon, sitting there playing games.
Now, obviously, if we're talking about legendary computer companies, Next has got to be up there in one of the most important technology companies of all time.
Oh, yes. Next was the machine that Steve Jobs headed.
Yeah,
after he left Apple.
When he got binned from Apple, in about 1985, he obviously went to set up Next Software Incorporated, and obviously they had like the Next Cube and these quite high-end machines. A lot of them were kind of used in desktop publishing and the creative industries. But also, I mean, if you're talking about important things that happened on there, the World Wide Web was made on a Next Cube.
Yeah, and it was called Next Step, wasn't it? The operating system. Yeah.
Which Apple obviously bought Next in the late 90s. Next Step turned into OS X that they use now.
Was it OS X Next or?
I think there might have been a bit of that in there, but you don't pronounce it OS X, so that's always been a bugbear of Apple fans.
What is it?
OS X.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Roman numeral after OS 9. Yeah. But maybe there is some of the Next in there. Yeah, I didn't think of it,
I didn't think of the numerals.
I didn't think of the so Ravi were met in the middle there. But I mean, such an important company. Without that as well, like the iPhone wouldn't have come around without the Next software. But what's quite interesting is a document has been donated to the Computer History Museum, showing that apparently Steve Jobs had a different plan for Next. He wanted to basically make it into a .com company that they were going to do an IPO and let people, buy shares in the company.
Oh, okay.
Inspired by Netscape. And obviously Netscape went public, didn't they, in like the mid-90s?
Yeah.
You famously remember. But Next were quite an interesting company because the hardware, even though it was quite pricey, didn't really earn a lot of money for them. And the OpenStep operating system, and they did release that on a lot of different platforms as well. But really had this really good technology called Web Objects.
Okay.
Which was really, and it was for making applications on the web. It was Java-based. And even like, Apple used it for making the iTunes store. But really, Jobs thought the future of Next was going to be Web Objects, and he kind of was going to bank the company on that. Let people buy shares in the company, hopefully make his money back on it, and kind of that will be the future of the company. That was a plan for it.
And then it ended up, Apple really needed him.
Yeah.
And it kind of got devoured by those guys.
I mean, you're looking at the losses. Next actually made a loss of $273 million. And they reckon that, doing these shares, which would have been $16, would have raised them $72 million. So it's still about $200 million in debt, but...
Well, I find it interesting that you mentioned Netscape as well, because Netscape, if you've ever watched, there's a fantastic documentary about Netscape and how Microsoft kind of, with their monopoly, destroyed Netscape essentially, and it became the Mozilla Foundation and came back and bit Microsoft in the bum, really, with Firefox.
That's on YouTube, isn't it? You can watch that documentary.
Yeah, fantastic. I recommend that to everyone.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting to see what could have been, because you just think if he decided not to let Apple buy the company, I mean, judging by the finances and the way that Apple were at the time, both companies needed each other. But it's interesting to think if that had happened, there might not have been no iPhones today, no Mac OS. Maybe if the company took a different direction earlier, no web as we know it now.
Yeah,
so
it's crazy. A little form could
Yeah.
have changed everything.
So if you want to have a look at that little form that could have changed the world, I'll put that in this week's show notes as well. Speaking of the iPhone, one of my favourite games has been made free to play on iPhone and Android this week.
Crazy Taxi.
Hey, hey, hey.
That's it.
You're a big fan of Crazy Taxi, weren't you?
Oh, yeah. I remember going to this really rubbish arcade that would smell of cigarettes and there'd be fruit machines. But the one appeal for me, well, two, House of the Dead machine. And next to that, you'd have Crazy Taxi and you could actually lean back on the arcade machine and you had a big wheel.
Yeah.
And that was really cool.
Well, I remember, because I kind of got out of gaming in the early 2000s, but I remember playing it on the Dreamcast, just before my sabbatical, where I took about 6 years off gaming. But it was, I've always loved racing games anyway. And that game is just... It's just hilarious to play, even to this day,
It's just the kind of, you finish your job and then your heart gets racing because you've got to finish a next
Watching that
one.
clock.
And it's like that kind of build-up of panic.
Well, you could always get this game on iPhone and Android. It's been out for, about 7-8 years, I think. But now they've made it free to download.
Cool.
The only thing is it's ad-supported. So
Wasn't there enough ads in it anyway, with driving around to Pizza Hut and KFC and all of the Tower Records? Don't you remember all the
product placements?
Yeah, in-game stuff.
Well, with this, you've actually got to kind of watch adverts before you get into the game.
God, even more.
So you've got to sit there and watch a video. But I opened this up on my phone. Here we go. What's wrong there?
What? Where's I? That was, oh man. So they haven't got the original Offspring tune in there?
Well, you know what? Every article I've read said it is in there. But I've been playing it today and it hasn't come around for me unless there's a couple of different songs in there.
But that was the most annoying thing about Crazy Taxi, but it actually got good. Every menu would be, aye. Everything would be constantly, yeah.
And, I remember Pretty Fly for a White Guy by The Offspring. That was a tune. But it's all I want was just, it's not Crazy Taxi without that.
Yeah, even if you paused it, I think it still played that song. It was
But there is, apparently there are ways to play your own music over the game. So I guess you could download it off the iTunes store and listen to it over it on repeat or something.
Yeah, but that's a bit sad. They should have included that, You want to get the full experience, don't you? Even if it is free.
Yeah.
And full of adware, bloatware crap,
Well, I think their license for the song did run out a few years ago, some people have been saying. But it's, it's not the same without the Offspring music, but it's cool to have it for free. It is only $2 if you want to buy it anyway. So
yeah,
there you go.
Spend the $2 for Offspring.
Yeah, and then another $2 on the music. Yeah. Now, maybe buying music wasn't quite your style back in the day, and in the early 2000s. We did kind of mention at the beginning about services that would let you download MP3s back in the day. Napster obviously was a big one.
Napster was the biggest for me. Before we'd download everything from booth cases and you'd have to find little rubbish sites, FTPs, hardly any tunes, probably a few Metallica ones somewhere, or MIDI versions. There was MIDI versions of everything. Yeah, but Napster came out and you had full MP3s. It was fantastic.
Well, it's fair to say Napster changed the world.
Oh, totally changed the world and kind of just blew that idea of piracy. Opened Pandora's box. That's what Napster did.
Because so much of the music industry and, these kind of aging rock bands and stuff, they were so resilient to having their music available in a digital format. So I remember you go to Our Price and stuff in 96, 97. CD albums were 18 quid.
Yeah. And I remember all the campaigns on TV. You'd have Dr. Dre saying, screw Napster. And you'd have Metallica. They were massively against it, yeah.
They didn't want the music to be released digitally at all. And then obviously Napster came along. Then you had services like iTunes came along in its wake, and It really was a service, like you said, opened Pandora's box and changed the world. Quite interestingly, though, Sean Parker, who is best known for founding Napster, and obviously he was in there like quite early in Facebook's history as well, two massive companies. Now he's working on patenting an anti-piracy technology. How ironic.
Yeah, how ironic. And it sounds a bit of a silly idea. Well, I don't know if it's a silly idea, but I don't think it's going to work. He's basically, the idea is called the screen room, and you kind of pay £50 music ticket. You pay £50 to stream a movie,
okay.
And that's the idea is that that's how much you'd pay to go to the cinema. So it's like the latest movie in the cinema is directly sent to you. Cody.
So you can watch it at the same time it's in the cinema, pretty much.
Yeah. But this time it's legitimate, but also it will monitor nearby devices to prevent digital content misuse. So it's doing some degree of spying on your home network to see if you're ripping these things or sending them to other devices.
You know what, though? Like, someone like Sean will surely realise that if you can watch it on a screen, if you can listen to it on a speaker, there's always a way.
It's weird as well because, like, Napster, he didn't give a damn then. You know, he was like, this is the future. We're blowing up, you know, we're totally destroying the music industry. And the kind of movie industry at the moment is rife with piracy, and he's trying to lock it down now at the point where I see the most movies are being distributed to people via like TV boxes, torrents, and all of these other means. It's more available than it's ever been, and he's trying to limit it. It just seems a bit weird.
Well, obviously the movie industry are in a panic about how it's all going, and you know, you did say there are services like Kodi, and I know you can often get so I hear, the latest movies that are showing in the theatre, often with like, you know, subtitles or from abroad, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But they do need to do something about it. But I'm not convinced this is the way.
Yeah, I not think Sean Parker's going to be their saviour.
No. Well, I think, you know, surely the solution to this is kind of the way they did it with the music industry, because, like I said before, they were charging 18 quid for a CD before in the late 90s. Then kind of when iTunes and that got, you know, publicly available and you could download music legally from them, you'd pay £5 for an album. Anyone would do that. You know, it's easier to buy it legitimately than it is to find a good copy.
But then it's the experience as well. So now I went to the cinema, a Showcase, which is a cinema outside of Nottingham, and I'd not been there for 10, 15 years to the Showcase because it's a real old one. I went there, they've got £7.50 a ticket, quite cheap, and they've got these luxury chairs there.
Nice,
that you can kind of lift up the seats and arms, and it's really nice, and really big 3D screen. It was fantastic experience, and I'm definitely going back there. So, you know, there's those elements. They need to make it a nice experience again, and people will go to the cinema.
Well, some of the best cinemas I've been to recently, have you heard of Everyman Cinemas?
No.
Have they got one of these in Leeds? There's like a big new shopping centre there. There's one upstairs. Went a couple of years ago to watch the Alan Partridge movie.
Yeah,
with my mate used to go to uni with, who used to love Alan Partridge. And it's so cool because, I mean, you actually get your own couch when you go in.
Yeah.
And they have a waiter comes over. They bring you beer and pizza.
So my girlfriend's from Brazil, and she says you just get a menu there. Yeah, and you could like ring a bell and people just bring you food and stuff, and the cinemas are massively popular.
Yeah.
Same with India as well. In India, people are just serving you food. The films go on for like 6 hours.
Yeah,
the
so
whole
you
family
need to eat
sitting
then.
there, yeah.
But I mean, here it is kind of going to the Odeon on a Saturday, paying 50 quid for a family of four, and the popcorn and all that.
And then sitting through adverts for half an hour, and then,
I think the solution is, like you said, is making it a better experience. Or if you want to watch these films at home, give people a way of doing it in an affordable way, maybe through something like Netflix or same as iTunes, you know, make the movies affordable. Then you're going to earn more money by more people doing it legitimately. I
think spying on people is not the way to go.
Yeah, Sean Parker, you got it wrong there. Maybe he's doing something dodgy in the background.
Yeah. Downloading MP3s.
Yeah, using their servers to do that, yeah. I'm sure he isn't. Now, before we get into this week's interview with the legend that is Rob Hubbard, quite a cool little Commodore 64 story that you found here. Wolfenstein 3D has had a port to the Commodore 64 and 128 if you have a Super CPU accelerator.
Do you know what the Super CPU is?
It's an accelerator.
It's a very nice accelerator, and you need 16 meg of RAM as well.
Which is a lot for a C64, admittedly.
Yeah, definitely. But this accelerator, I remember seeing it years ago, and they had a really cool kind of custom games made for it, and it can run a lot more powerful stuff than the C64 used to. So they had this one called Metal Dust, and I remember seeing that, and I was like, oh, this is quite an amazing looking side scroller. And then the soundtrack came on, and it was this big German techno band, Metal Dust. Yeah, it was really cool. And some of the stuff you can do is amazing, but I'm not really sure where to get these super CPUs from.
I know the first release that came out, I mean, that was a bit buggy, I remember, but the version 2 of the Super CPU, probably the best accelerator that you can get for the C64. But there has been this port of Wolfenstein 3D. And what's really cool is it's actually based on the open source, original id Software source code. And there's a little YouTube video on Indie Retro News here that Neil's embedded on the page, and the scrolling is so smooth on it for a Commodore 64. Have you watched this video?
Yeah, I've seen the video, but I'm also looking here that they've got a version of Doom, and they're saying that Doom's nowhere near as good as this Wolfenstein version.
I remember that Doom, I think, was just a standard C64 port.
Yeah, it's just like an experimental kind of version. But yeah, this looks great.
But you can even get Doom on the VIC-20. Someone ported it to that a couple of years ago, so it actually plays all right.
Have you seen the Vectrex demo as well?
Well, no, is that all vector-based?
Vector-based Doom. They've done the first level. It's insane.
I can run Doom on my toaster.
That's it.
But if you do want to play this, super CPU release of Wolfenstein, you can play it in the WinVice emulator 3.1. That supports super CPU emulation, so if you haven't got the original hardware, you can give it a try in there. All right, well, thank you for checking out episode number 74 of the Retro Hour podcast. We'll be out again next Friday. Please do leave a review or a thumbs up or a comment on your favourite podcast client or anywhere that you listen to the show. That's always appreciated. And now, let's get into one of our most requested guests that we've ever had on the Retro Hour podcast. We're Not Worthy.
Rob Hubbard, you are our God.
And we'll see you next week.
Ciao.
Listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time for our special guest this week, and we are so pleased that you took the time to join us. Welcome to the show, Rob Hubbard.
Hiya.
Now, before we get into your stories of your many years of making amazing video game soundtracks, let's rewind right back to the beginning. Do you remember when you first ever experienced a computer then? Where did it all start?
The first computer experience was actually a C6. No, it wasn't. It was an Apple. There was an Apple green screen machine that was around that I saw. But that first one that I bought was the C64. I was working as a musician. I've pretty much been a musician all my life. I look back, I can't remember a day when I can't remember ever not being able to play, or being able to read music or being able to write. So I was working as a musician, and all the magazines were saying if you're a musician, you should start to think about getting into computers. And that's how I kind of drifted into it all. Once you get a machine, you become very intrigued by how it works and what makes it tick.
So who was it who convinced you to get a Commodore 64 then? Why was that the machine that you chose?
It was the adverts, because they were like advertising it as having an elephant's memory because it had 64K. Spectrum was only 16K, and some of these other machines were less. And they said this thing had 64K, and it actually had a synthesizer chip, and that was the reason why I got it.
I do remember those adverts, actually. So everyone said that Commodore were really bad at advertising, but you actually bought it off the back of an advert then?
Not solely on the back of the advert. I mean, there was a lot of other weird machines around at the time, like the Acorn Atom. There was a couple of other things. I can't remember the names of them, but they were like totally nowhere near as good as a C64. So in that respect, it was just pure chance.
So how did your first days on the Commodore 64 go then? What kind of stuff were you doing with it initially when you first got it?
Well, like everybody else, you get the machine, then you start buying the magazines and typing in the listings and then trying to figure out, what on earth the language is about, and then figuring out why on earth the stuff you type in never seems to work. They never ever did work, and then trying to figure out, well, why doesn't it work? then doing stuff in BASIC yourself, and then realising that's no good, and everybody else is programming assembly language, machine code, and so that's the next logical step. You have to learn machine code.
Did you find it easy to learn machine code, having learnt to read music and score before?
Well, I mean, the music thing tends to give you a more kind of somewhat of a mathematical leaning. A lot of musicians are kind of into math themselves, So at the time, I didn't really find machine code that difficult. Once you get to grips with binary and hexadecimal and all this stuff, But I mean, it's like anything else, You have to be very disciplined about what you're doing, and you've got to put in the hours. You've got to put in all the work, It just doesn't happen overnight. You've got to sweat it out till 4 or 5 in the morning, night after night,
Lots of late nights.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Well, obviously, I mean, when you were doing this kind of, predated like sequencers and trackers and all that kind of thing. I mean, what was the process of composing on the Commodore 64 for you at that point?
I used to, on those games, I used to sketch out musical ideas, because if I came across an idea, I generally wanted to get it down on paper so that I couldn't forget, I wouldn't forget what it was I was actually thinking about. And then having sketched down like some phrases, generally it was a melody and some semblance of some bass notes or something like that, I would then code that up, and it would only be like 2 to 4 bars or something, and then I would code that up in hexadecimal. It was all byte-driven stuff, and then I would run the machine code monitor where I could edit the synthesizer parameters in real time. I could also change the pitches in real time if I didn't like the way some of the pitches were, and then after a while I was dealing in hex. I knew all the pitches in hexadecimal off by heart, like 3-0, 3C and 4-8 were all C in different octaves. I knew exactly what the pitches were because I'd been that familiar working at it. And then having got like a couple of bars or 2 or 4 bars going on the machine code monitor, I would then expand that out to 16 bars or whatever, and then work on the next section, which I would then do in the same way. It was never a case of doing, a 5-minute tune, scoring it out on score paper and then coding the whole thing up, and hoping that you don't make a mistake. It's like programming assembly language. You work in very small chunks, and you write verification for these small chunks to make sure the code is working properly and doesn't have any bugs. And so I used to do music in the same kind of way, very small chunks, and make sure that each little part didn't get out of sync with itself. Because if you got a note value wrong and it was looping, it would gradually drift out of sync,
It was a lot of improvisation then, so you weren't like writing the score down and translating it, you were improvising. And
I was improvising some of the some bits of it, but it wasn't like improvising the whole 4-minute piece, I mean, to me the act of composition is pretty much in a traditional sense is an improvised process. I'm sure all the top composers were extremely prolific improvisers, but I'm not talking about improvising like you're playing John Coltrane or something, I'm talking about very slow, deliberate improvising where you're trying to get into a zone and you kind of hear things in your head and you're trying to capture what your inner ear is telling you into musical sense that you can then translate to a keyboard or score paper.
Well, who were you listening to at the time, and kind of were you using any of these influences in your music?
I had a lot of influences because of my background. I had like a strong classical influence, I had a strong jazz influence, and then in the 80s there was quite a strong electronic influence with the Jean-Michel Jarre and Kraftwerk and then all the new romantic pop stuff that was happening. It's like one big melting pot where you have all your own musical influences, and it's not a case of that people compose totally original stuff out of thin air. The only way you could do that would be to take somebody, give them a piano and lock them in a room for 30 years and make sure they don't actually listen to any outside influence. Everybody who composes has like a whole laundry list of influences that they've had, and that kind of amalgamates bits and pieces from it all and comes out in the writing,
It's actually really interesting you mentioned Kraftwerk and New Romantic music, because we've had other video game composers on the show before who said really around that time, the early 80s, when electronic music was becoming more mainstream, it actually helped a lot of musicians and artists take computer music more seriously. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah. The fact that these bands like started, Human League and Bidure and Flock of Seagulls and Depeche Mode with Vince Clarke and all that stuff, did kind of bring it to the mainstream, and they started experimenting with the sounds, and it became very fashionable. If it wasn't for them, I don't think anybody would have ever listened to Kraftwerk or Jean-Michel Jarre.
Well, you started out writing educational music software, is that correct? I mean,
yeah.
Why did you change to games then?
I started doing educational stuff because I thought that would be a moneymaker, But then it became apparent that just was not going to fly, because none of the schools were ever going to be able to afford these computers, and the staff were never going to be computer literate enough to be able to get to grips with it. So then I started looking at the game side of it, because it was always a way of trying to think, well, how can I make any money out of this stuff?
How did you kind of get the word out or scout around for work?
I did some demos, and I bought every computer magazine that was around and made a mailing list of all the addresses and phone numbers of every software publisher and every developer, and I started doing mail-outs to everybody, and it took about 6 or 7 months before I got a chance to do any work. Most of the time they say, well, we've never heard of you, we don't know who you are, so we're not interested, and that's what happened to me.
Well, how did you get involved with Gremlin?
How did I get involved with Gremlin? I think they had my demo, and I think I'd done a couple of Mastertronics games by then, and I think they were just curious, really, to see what I would do.
So I remember as a kid, Mastertronic were a great label because, especially their 199 range, kids could actually afford the games.
Yeah, 199 for those games, I know.
What was your first one that was published then through them?
I think it was Action Biker, I think. Mm-hmm. I think that was the first one.
Was that crazy when you saw your game in a shop for the first time? That must have been pretty special.
Well, I didn't actually see that game in the shop, plus the fact I thought a game like Action Biker 199 was probably around in the shops for a month, right? And then would be, put in the bargain bin for 25 pence or something, and that would be the end of it. Nobody would ever hear of that thing again. I thought the whole industry was only going to be a temporary blip for maybe a year.
Lasted a bit longer than that, though, in the end.
Yeah, it did, just a little bit, yeah. Yeah.
So did you think your kind of approach to video game music, your kind of professional approach, helped you establish a good reputation?
When I first started, a lot of the music on the games was just really, really bad. I mean, they were, trying to do some classical things, and there was just wrong notes all over the place, and, bad timing, and it was just dire. And so, for me, I thought there's got to be a gig somewhere where you can actually get the notes in the right place and try to make it reasonably in time, That's how I kind of got into it. But, because I'd been working as a professional musician, I had that work ethic as well. If you've got a gig, you're never late for a gig, you show up on time, and, you try to play the best you can. You try to give 100% effort. That was the work ethic that I brought to doing the jobs,
Well, what did you think of the Commodore 64's competitors, like the Spectrum, for example?
The Spectrum really didn't really factor into it for me, because it was the 16K Spectrum it wasn't something I really had to worry about, because I was getting such a lot of work on the C64, Later on, I did do stuff on Spectrum 128, Amstrad, ST, Amiga, and the MSX machines.
Obviously, talking about the Commodore 64, you mentioned there that it had more RAM than the Speccy, for example. Did you ever run into problems with the memory limitations of the 64, though? Did that ever get frustrating when you got told, how much how many kilobytes you might have to fit your music into a game?
Well, it was like a Brexit negotiation, wasn't it? You basically get in there with the programmer and you negotiate these stuff. My rule of thumb for just about every platform that I worked on was always 10%. I want 10% of the memory and 5 to 10% of the processor. That was the same with the C64, the Amstrad, the NES system, the Sega Genesis, and the Sony PlayStation. It was always the same kind of ballpark that I would ask for.
Did that ever cause arguments?
Not really. Sometimes I did compromise, I had one game on the Amstrad where I had to get everything into 2K. Believe it or not, it's actually 2,000 bytes, Everything. That was the code, the music data, and the sound effects. And so it's a case of stripping out, well, I can't afford to have this root part of the code, it takes too many bytes. I can't afford to have this, I need to simplify this. You juggle things around and you bit pack everything to the millionth degree to try to use every bit available of every byte to get something to work in a very small amount of memory.
You must have had lots of little hacks and tricks that you were doing on these machines.
Yeah, I mean, there was one of the big routines was the vibrato routine, and you couldn't do a proper divide because these 8-bit processors didn't have a divide instruction. So you were always trying to see if you could do a vibrato without doing a divide by, just using bit shifting and adding, and then trying to see how you could get that part of the code to run as quickly as possible. You would do a lot of self-modifying code, which we couldn't do these days, but you could back then. So you get parts of the code to modify itself. You could even modify some of the instructions. So I remember modifying an increment instruction to a decrement instruction and things like that.
We know you agreed to do a soundtrack for a game. I mean, did you get much instruction from the publishing companies or the developers, or were you given pretty much a free rein then?
It depends, It was pretty much around the whole 180 degrees. And sometimes I would go and see the publisher or the developer and spend, half a day down there talking about what they wanted. Sometimes they were very specific and wanted me to basically copy a piece of music, in which case I would try to do that. Sometimes the thing that they wanted me to copy would be completely impossible, and I would tell them you can't do it, And then other times, all I would get would be a phone call and a vague description about what this thing was going to be about, and get on and do something. But I always preferred to actually look at some early graphics to get some sense of the pace of the game. Because you want to write some music which kind of fits the speed of what the graphics are doing. If it's like slow paced or if it's fairly frenetic, your music should try to reflect that.
Well, you mentioned kind of unrealistic requests that you might have got from developers and publishers. I mean, I heard that one guy actually asked you to do basically recreate a Jimi Hendrix song or something on the Commodore 64.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I just remember the guy sounded like he was a bit stoned, and he just said, "Give us some Hendrix, man," and that was Arcade Classics. Fortunately, I had that digitized instrument routine working as well on the non-maskable interrupt, and so I did that tune for Arcade Classics with the electric guitar sample in it. That's how that came about. Not really Hendrix, but, the most rocked out thing I could do at the time.
Well, Commando was an interesting story. How did that come about?
They called me up at 11 o'clock in the morning or something, said, can you get a train? I was living in Newcastle. Can you get a train down to Birmingham? We want you to work on this game. We need it real quick because it's got to ship. I got a train down to Birmingham, spent most of the time in the pub till about 10 o'clock. Went back to the office, and then they locked me in the office, and I just worked through the night. Then 8 o'clock in the morning, I had everything done. The music and the high score and all the sound effects was all done. And then I think they took me to the train station. I got a train back home.
Didn't you have the music playing on every computer in the office or something? I heard.
Yeah, I think so.
That must have been a welcome sound when they all came in the next morning.
Yeah, I think I did something crazy like that. Yeah.
Sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
Well, one fantastic tune that I love is Rasputin, and it's kind of got and almost a techno beat behind it. It's very fast paced. What was the kind of brief on that game?
It was just the Rasputin thing was the legendary figure, you know. So I think I went out and bought an album of Russian folk music or something, because some of those tunes are really derivative from well-known Russian tunes. And then I really want to be able to get that tempo to speed up as it progresses. And at the time, the code wouldn't do it, so I then modified the code so I could then, at any point in time, like, specify the tempo and nudge the tempo up. So that's how that tune came about.
Well, obviously, one of your most celebrated games is Monty on the Run. I mean, that is a legendary title on the Commodore 64.
Yeah.
What was the story behind the music on that game then?
Well, it was actually, they gave me a cassette of that Dick Barton theme, which is what it was based on. Mm. They said, can you do this, but kind of just change it a little bit. So that's basically what I did. But then I added like 2 other big sections to it. So there's the first section, and then there's the kind of guitar solo bit in the middle, and then there's like the kind of frenetic violin thing towards the end. And it just seemed to fit the pace of the game of this thing running around. It was a little platform game which was really difficult to play, almost impossible, but it just seemed to fit the pace fitted the game.
Well, later on you did a collaboration with Ben Daglish.
Yeah.
The Auf Wiedersehen Monty. What was it like working with him?
No, it was kind of manic. It was a bit of a crazy time. We didn't get much done for quite a lot of hours because we were just goofing off all the time and drinking beer and stuff. And but then when we got stuck into it, we did get we got some quite novel ideas into that tune, which was to create. It's a pretty unusual tune, I think.
We had Ben on our show about a year ago, but very talented guy, isn't he?
Oh yeah, Ben. Yeah, Ben's a phenomenal flute player. He's absolutely top draw when it comes to playing flute.
Well, one game that really did push the boundaries and blew me away when I heard it as a kid was, even though it was a very difficult game to play, we just put it on for the music, and that was the Last V8.
Oh, Last V8. That was a 199 Mastertronic game.
Yeah, but very tough to play. But the music on that game, I mean, especially that, you even got like a speech sample in the beginning. I mean, how did you get that so clear on the Commodore 64?
I don't know. I don't even know if I did the speech sample or if they did the speech sample. I mean, I remember doing the music and other things, but I don't recall anything about that speech sample.
Well, the music itself was quite futuristic sounding as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the game was kind of I thought it was like some kind of Mad Max futuristic thing, from what I remember. The Last V8 with a V8 engine car or something. I don't know.
Well, were there any instances where, you did the music for a game and then got to play it after, and like the game itself was a bit of a letdown compared to the music?
To be honest with you, after like I did, the thing on a spring, and I looked at Monty on the Run, the game, and after that I didn't really look at any of the games because I didn't have time. The phone would ring and say, "Can you do this? Can you do this?" Now I would just accept it, everything that came in, and say yes, I'll do it. I wasn't prepared to turn any work down, but I never actually got to play any of those games, but I didn't have any time to do that.
Well, have any tunes that you made been kind of unexpected hits, ones that you thought weren't that good, or weren't amazing, and they've been taken up by the audience? Yeah,
I would say so. When I first did the Sanction tune, the first section of it, I thought I'm not really sure about this. I didn't like it very much, and it did start to get better when I the more I kind of added on to that tune. Then people really started to like that tune, and then after a while I started to like it. But initially I didn't really like it very much. One
of your biggest stories of success on the Commodore 64 would be the music for International Karate.
Yeah.
And Egg Plus, I mean, before we did the interview tonight, I'd listened again to the International Karate music, and it's incredible what you did. I mean, it's like over 10 minutes long. Did you use any new methods in making that?
The thing is, my mindset at the time was that, these people are playing these games, right? They're playing them for hours on end, and so you've got to, you can't just do something for a minute and a half because it's just going to drive them nuts, So you've got to try to do something that's got some interest in it and that they're a bit longer type of tunes. That's why some of these tunes went up to 10 minutes and 12 minutes, and I think the longest one I did was 17 minutes or something.
Wow.
But just so that it doesn't get that boring for them.
Well, with International Karate, I mean, you know, some people said there's influences of, like, you know, Forbidden Colour in there as well, and Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. I mean,
yeah, that's what they asked for. They specifically asked for that. But then, could you change it a bit so, you know, it's not exactly the same, you know. But then I just couldn't have that little 16-bar section. That's why I changed all those other sections in there and tried to keep that kind of, you know, the same kind of vibe.
Well, you made an interesting point there. I mean, did you ever get into, like, any legal or copyright issues?
No, there wasn't any back then. We weren't even sure who had the copyright to anything. I mean, all the stuff I did was basically do the work and get paid a fee. Nobody was really sure about who owned anything. I don't even know. I wasn't sure about copyright. It's not like today. I mean, people are aware of all these rights issues, but not back then. I think I did Zulu on a game because they actually asked me to do that, and I don't know what the legal situation, because I had to copy it exact, you know, and I'm not sure what the situation with that tune was.
Yeah, I think you're right. It didn't really exist in the computer game industry, did it? Everyone just kind of did it, and, like, no one really noticed, I guess.
Yeah, that's it. Well, I mean, it was like, you know, you've seen the film, right? Bedroom to Billions?
Yeah.
Have you seen the Amiga years?
Yes. We read them on our show, actually, yeah.
The Amiga years is a fantastic film with R.J. Michael and Jay Miner and Dave Needles and all those guys. And, you know, I've got to give it a plug, not because I owe them anything, but because I think everybody who has an interest in the 80s business needs to see how people were thinking back then. And that film captures what RJ and those guys were thinking, the way they worked, absolutely spot on.
You did some composition as well for Bedrooms to Billions.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, for the original, yeah.
Well, magazines were huge back then. Did you have a good relationship with them?
Yeah, I think that I had a pretty good relationship with the Zap guys and Commodore User and some of these other magazines. Was it C&VG was the other magazine, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I had a pretty good relationship with them, you know.
Did you ever get to visit the guys at Zap, like their headquarters or anything?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I went to see them. It was manic. It was just complete mayhem because they were basically kids, you know. I mean, it beggars belief how they ever managed to get those magazines out on time. But I mean, Gary Liddon. Gary Liddon's a pretty smart guy, you know. He was pretty wild back then. So was Gary Penn. They're both pretty smart guys, you know.
Well, what was it like when the kind of first trackers arrived and music production software started to come out? Did it make life easier?
Well, for me, I kind of bypassed the trackers because I'd moved to the US in 1988. I went to work for Electronic Arts. So I was stuck with the IBM PC for a while until the NES came out and the Sega Genesis came out, and then I could get back to my doing my thing, you know, which is the assembly language programming and low-level chip access. And I never saw those tracker things until well into 2000, you know, the early 2000s.
Did you find programming for the consoles as fun as programming for the C64?
The programming was fun because I enjoyed writing for the FM chip and exploring the possibility and getting the digital audio channel to work on the Sega. I think I got a digital audio working on the NES. I can't remember. But that aspect was fun. Musically, it was quite different, though, because the US audience were never going to put up with something like Knuckle Busters, you know. And so you had to be a bit more straight-laced or middle of the road with what you were doing musically.
Well, you did work on these 16-bit computers before you went there. I know you did like some work on the Amiga and the Atari ST as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I did a couple of things on the ST and I did a few things on the Amiga. But that was still before there was trackers. But the Amiga stuff was still all hard-coded assembly language, 68000 or 68020.
Because I know the Atari ST had like that Yamaha chip. I mean, you must have was it actually a bit more limited than the SID?
Yeah, it was. It was dreadful. The same chip that was on the Amstrad, and it was the same chip that was on the Spectrum 128 and the MSX machines. It was really Compared to the SID chip, it was rubbish.
Obviously, you went to Electronic Arts after that. How did you get the job there then and start working for them?
I went down to London because I got an award for Best Music for something or other down in London in 87 or 86 or something. And I met Mark Lewis and from Electronic Arts. And I was aware of what EA was doing at that time because they were like really right on the leading edge of what they were doing on the Amiga with Deluxe Paint and some of these other programs. And Mark Lewis says, do you want to come to California for a couple of months and work out there? And so I went and worked out there for a couple of months, and then that's when I did Skate or Die. Mm-hmm. And they'd never heard that digital audio stuff coming out of a C64 with guitars and stuff, you know. Basically, they were blown away when they heard that and offered me a job right there and then. They said, do you want to work in England or California? I said, well, I think I'll go to California.
Not a hard choice to make, is it, when the sun shines there?
Yeah. Well, it was a hard choice in a lot of other ways, to be honest, you know. I was giving up a lot of other stuff, but it was just, you know, you couldn't pass that by, could you? You couldn't pass that chance up, you know.
How did you find working out there was different to back home then? Were there many changes?
It was, in the early days of EA, it was great. I mean, there was so much, like it was a bit like that Bedroom to Billions, the Amiga years. That whole vibe was still there, you know. People would pull all-nighters and then they would take like 2 days off and disappear, or, you know. And they didn't care as long as you kind of, you know, got the work done. But there was a real great sense of entrepreneurship and innovation and future vision. Mainly Trip Hawkins, who was driving all that. And, you know, for most of the 90s, it was great.
What was Trip like to work with?
Trip was fantastic, man. He was the whole visionary for the company, and, you know, he was like... when I joined, there was maybe about 160 people there worldwide or something, you know. And, you know, we used to have these meetings, and all the salespeople and the admins were all on an equal par with, like, the programmers and the artists, and everybody just pulled together and Trip everybody exactly the same. It was just, he was always conveying his vision about what he wanted for the future, you know, and everybody got a real interest in the company because they had stock options and stock purchase plan and all this kind of stuff, you know.
What was your role there? Because I know you were the only sound dedicated person.
Yeah, I was the only sound guy that they had in the beginning. I was working on all the games, and I was writing the code and writing all the music and doing all the sound effects. And they obviously started to hire more people once the Sega Genesis started taking off, because they started doing a lot more games, and the profits were going through the roof for EA at that time.
Was it a surprise when Trip left the company then?
Yeah, I think it was a case of Trip wanted to go and do his thing. He still had his vision. He went off to do the 3DO, which was really a bit of a disaster because it was too far ahead of its time with what he wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the corporate side of EA wanted to focus on figuring out how to make games that could generate consistent revenues, the revenues that they could predict, you know. And I think that was the conflict there.
Well, you know, speaking of 3DO, I mean, you actually were involved in some of the design process, or, you know, a bit of kind of consultancy work you did on there, on the audio hardware with RJ Michael and Dave Needle.
Yeah. The audio hardware was kind of crippled because of the resources that the chip didn't have in the end. So it didn't go that well. You can ask for the earth, but you're not going to get it when it comes down to costing.
Well, obviously, I mean, we did tragically lose Dave Needle in the last 12 months.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
What was he like to work with then? Any stories you remember?
Not that I'm going to say, no.
Right. He must have been an interesting character then, RJ, as well. You know, we've met RJ a few times.
Oh, did you? Oh, RJ was really a fascinating guy. You know, the thing I remember about 3DO is going down to their office, right? And they had this, like, monstrosity which was about, you know, a meter cubed of this kind of breadboard stuff with wires and all over, you know, it's hanging around all over the place, you know. It just looked like something from the NASA space shuttle or something. And it was, that was like the very first prototype that they did of the 3DO box.
What did you think of the hardware when you first saw it then? Because, that era, there was so much new stuff coming out, wasn't there?
Yeah. I mean, I was much more concerned with the audio side of that than the graphics side.
Mm-hmm. So EA obviously had a close relationship with 3DO, didn't they?
Yeah, they did, because of and EA was developing like a couple of games for it. But like I say, it was ahead of its time, and the hardware didn't deliver what the vision was, and the price was wrong as well.
Yeah, it was quite expensive, wasn't it, that machine?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Well, what do you think of the kind of resurgence of chip music at the moment today?
The retro chip music and all that stuff is a little bit baffling. There is so much really, really great stuff in terms of software that you can get, and VST plugins and sequencers, Logic and Cubase, and Sibelius is fantastic. You can do so much with these programs. I can't see why anybody would want to do chip music. But then I talked to a friend of mine from Aberdeen called Kenny McAlpine, and he was saying, well, actually, he thinks what happens is that people get so baffled and bamboozled by all the choices that they have with a lot of technology and plugins and mixers and all kinds of other synthesizers. They actually relish the thought of just a Game Boy with a limited number of channels and resources. So a lot of their decision making is taken away, and so they only focus on what on what a Game Boy audio can do. That's what attracts them to it. So I think maybe there's some truth in that, and also combined with the built-in nostalgia, as it were, for those 8-bit chips.
Yeah, I guess it kind of reminds people of maybe a simpler time. I think it's the same with like pixel art as well, isn't it? That's quite back in there.
Yeah, I think so. People seem to want to always hark back to a period in their life that they grew up with or related to when they were associated with the teenagers or puberty or something.
Yeah, there's always hundreds of guys on YouTube doing, electric guitar versions of Monty on the Run and stuff like that.
Yeah, I know. I did see that. I thought, wow, some of the guys are amazing, I did a tune called Ski or Die when I worked for EA, which had a custom MT32 sound bank that I designed for it. And it was a kind of a rock tune, and it has an absolutely fantastic guitar solo in it. And the story behind that is that when I worked at EA, we had this guy who was like network administration or something, right? I got talking to the guy. He says, "Oh, you play guitar a bit, do you?" He says, "Yeah, oh, yeah." He says, "I've just got this MIDI guitar. Can I come in your office and try it out?" I says, "Yeah, sure." And I was working on that Ski or Die tune. And he started playing, and this guy, he was phenomenal. He was just an amazing guitar player. And as soon as he started playing, I said, "Can you play something over this?" I slowed the tempo down a little bit and switched on the MIDI record. He played that thing. And then this MIDI guitar, it took me hours and hours to edit the MIDI. Anyway, it ended up in the game. And then I saw this guy on YouTube had transcribed the whole guitar solo at speed and was playing along with it on guitar.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, it was amazing,
Well, you've also worked with the symphonic game music concert and doing a live kind of symphony version of International Karate.
Yeah, that was in 2005, I think, yeah. We've been doing some scoring with Chris Abbott for some orchestral scores, and maybe with a bit of luck we might get another orchestral concert. If we get enough money from a Kickstarter, we might be able to do that. It's interesting to do that, the orchestral versions of some of these things, because some of them work out pretty good, some of them not so good. It's interesting being involved with the arranging, because some of the arrangements done by other people of old game music are really not up to par. They're not very good.
It must be pretty crazy seeing, like you said, this music you were making, like the Commodore 64 monitor, getting played by a full orchestra. That must be pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because there's a lot of the game music is being done by orchestras on all the recent games that, it trickles down to some of the earlier stuff. I think that people are still interested in the old game music as well.
Well, we saw you also received your honorary degree.
Oh yeah. That was quite a shock, I can tell you. It was quite a surreal, obviously, I was dead pleased. I was over the moon to get that. It was a bit of a surreal experience because Judy Murray was there and this guy Matthew Syed, who I've seen on TV a lot.
How did you find out about that? Did they just get in touch and
the ceremony was in November, and they approached me back in March, and I got this email saying that we need to talk to you, and it was from somebody at Abertay University, and give us a call, and I thought, oh, this is some sort of scam, like you do with some emails that you don't recognise, and you immediately think something's a scam. And so anyway, I checked it out, and I eventually called the guy, and he says, would you be up for receiving an honorary doctorate? And I said, well, yeah, sure I would. I'm going to refuse that,
So
getting an honorary doctorate is a hell of a lot better than getting a knighthood,
Have you changed your cards to Dr. Rob Hubbard?
No, I haven't, no.
Well, obviously, Rob, with such a long-spanning career and having so many amazing tracks in your back, you've done over 100 in Commodore 64 game music soundtracks. Are there any that you pick out as your favourites or any that you're most proud of?
The C64, obviously, I think the Sanction stands out. The Ken Tiller stands out. A few others like the Flash stands out. I still like some of the others, but they've been beaten to death too much for me, like the Commando and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I still think it stands up, but, I'm sick of hearing it.
Have you still got a C64?
No, I got rid of loads of stuff when I moved to California, and I gave loads of stuff away,
What are you planning on making? Any new tunes?
Like I say, if we do this, if some of this orchestral stuff comes off, right, then I'll do some new music for that. I've got a couple of things that I've done, and you're always still thinking about writing things. I have quite a lot of stuff that nobody's heard,
Well, Rob, obviously, if you do make any progress with a new Kickstarter or any new projects, do let us know, and obviously we'll get you back on and give it a big mention on the show.
Okay.
Absolutely. Well, Rob, it's been amazing talking to you. You're a guy who was pretty much the soundtrack to our childhood, so it's been amazing having you on the show this week.
Okay, no problem.
And if people want to keep up to date with what you're doing, do you tweet or Facebook or anything like that? Got a website?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't tweet. Well, I used to do Facebook, but I got out of that, and too much of too many opinionated people that I'm not interested in their opinions,
There's a lot of those.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, we'll look forward to seeing you on Kickstarter hopefully soon.
Okay,
Bye.
thanks.